So, full disclosure, when the Wakanda Forever trailer did come out, I was one of a handful of Negroes who expressed my less than excited attitude about the whole ordeal and was unceremoniously ratioed as a result. Black on black crime, everybody. And I mean, it wasn't that I didn't trust Coogler's ability to translate real life trauma in a respectful and tasteful manner on screen. I mean, he's been doing so since Fruitvale Station, but it was the whole process of the thing that I didn't trust. I mean, can you blame me? I'm a Sixers fan after all. Like, I mean, just take a step back and think about it for a second. Do you really trust Disney of all people, aka Culture Vulture Incorporated, to not compromise the integrity of an IP for the sake of a cash grab? Then obviously you've never seen Cars 2.
This trip's been amazing.
He's a little excited, isn't he?
Mater?
Which, I mean, technically is Pixar, and then again, the Cars franchise never really had any integrity to begin with, so I guess we're all square. By the way, never watch Cars 2. Or Cars 1 for that matter. And only watch the third one if you just need a reasonable excuse for Netflix and chill night. Like, I promise you, by the time you actually get the boinking, you won't really care enough about Lightning's midlife crisis to pay attention anymore anyway. Ask me how I know. Actually don't. So, color me pleasantly surprised when the movie not only addressed the real-life passing of Chadwick Boseman, but did so in as tasteful and, frankly, heart-tugging a manner as could be expected. Like, jokes aside, I really didn't know if I was going to make it through the first act of this movie after the whole homegoing sequence. Matter of fact, this whole movie is just one big homegoing celebration. And for the non-blackly blacks in the audience, yes, you heard me correct. And I will explain what that is in a few moments. And no, it has nothing to do with football. Well, most times. And this is applicable to blacks across the diaspora, but because I grew up in the black American church culture, I'm going to stay in my lane for once and speak specifically to that. See, black folks in the Americas have a, shall we say, complicated relationship with spirituality. And if y'all watched my video on liberation theology, then you would know that I tend to disagree with the general consensus that Christianity was introduced to West Africans when the Portuguese brought it over in the 15th century. And this is the reason why your friendly neighborhood Hotep dubs Christianity the white man's religion, even though they use the same Bible that the white man used to justify colonization to claim that black people are the real Jews, even though the Bible itself refutes that, and go on to create the most geographically correct maps you've ever seen in your life. Like this one. This map is younger than your grandparents, by the way. That being said, whether it was Christianity or survivals from Africa or some combination of the two, like Santeria or Hoodoo, for example, spirituality has always been essential to the black experience in the Americas. Well, historically at least. And this is where the primary conflict between Ramonda and Shuri comes in. See, Ramonda, like most elder blacks, frankly, takes comfort in the spiritual traditions of her people, while Shuri rebuffs, even resents them to a certain extent. Because you see, even in an ever secularized West, black Americans still remain highly spiritual, if not religious, at least compared to the Jim Pop. According to the Pew Research Center, 97% of us believe in God, or at least some higher power, as compared to 90% of the Gen Pop. And both of these numbers, honestly, were much larger than what I expected when I first did my research. Well, I mean, that is until I remembered all of those Latinos being smuggled across the border in order to shift the demographics of the South and Southwest just in time for the next election. Also, like, 73% of us believe in evil spirits and that they can and will cause harm to folk, as compared to 54% of the Gen Pop. But here's the real curveball, folks. Of the 21% of black Americans who are either religiously unaffiliated, atheist, or agnostic, 54% of those self-report to pray at least a few times a month. And 53% of that 21% also report to rely on prayer, at least to some degree, when making life decisions. So again, what this tells us is that more than half of black Americans who don't necessarily practice religion at least practice prayer. And I think that was the sound of Black Jesus growing another lock. I bring this point up because spirituality, even for the unaffiliated, is an essential part of the black experience, at least generally speaking. And for no other reason than the communal nature in which we practice it. And I will come back to that in a second, but before we do, let's talk about Shuri for a bit.
I'm tired of the church.
See, it's really easy to chalk up her rejection of faith to her youth and her expertise in all matters, scientific and mathematical. Like, I mean, seriously, does Wakanda have like a dual neurosurgery and rocket science program or something? Or am I just that weak in the upper story that I switched my major from econ to journalism once I saw a logarithm for the first time? I refuse to answer that question. But pay attention to the way that the movie opens.
Bastard. Time is running out. Please allow me to heal my brother of this illness, and I will never question your existence again.
See, I can't tell if at this point in the movie Shuri actually does believe that the ancestors are going to help her out in any way, shape, or form. But what we do know by this scene is that by her praying this prayer, she's at least drawing strength from the traditions of her people and by proxy from the community that taught her these beliefs. And see, that's the thing about religion among black people. It's a very communal experience, just like pretty much everything else we do. When we worship, when we rejoice, when we grieve, more often than not, we do so as a community. Again, this is one of those vestiges that survived the Middle Passage from the motherland, and it endures today, even despite us being forced into a society as ruggedly hyper-individualistic as the West is. If you've ever been to a black church service, then more than likely you've probably seen or heard a few things that would probably get you barred from your typical Sunday Mass. Like I said earlier, we're encouraged, hell, even expected to be participants in and during the service. Yes, even while the sermon is going forth. Most of the songs we sing are congregational, and most of those incorporate some form of call and response. Again, something that survived the Middle Passage from Africa. We clap, we sing, we stomp, we dance, like literally dance in the middle of the service. And if you don't, then frankly, you're the weirdo. I mean, that is unless you're white, obviously. In that case, we just assume that somebody invited you. Or you just got lost on your way to Sunday brunch at the vegan gastropub that a few years ago used to be the trap house where OG Mudbone got shanked with a piece of broken Pyrex pot. Can't say gentrification ain't good for something. So my point is, Shuri doesn't necessarily need to be a believer in order to draw strength from her people's beliefs. She just needs to believe that her people, her community, are going to pull together to get her through these tough times. But that being said, what happens when that belief is shattered? When I was 10 years old, my grandfather, who honestly was more like a father figure to me, died of lung cancer. But this was only after I had spent literally every night of like a year praying that God would heal his lungs, even though at that point they were blacker than a Crisco can of old bacon grease sitting on the kitchen windowsill. And I promise you that can is still good for something. Don't quite know what, but it is. So just leave it alone. I swear to God, if you throw it out. But you see, that wasn't even the problem. The problem was that my family, in particular, my dad's side of the family thought that the best way to tell me about my pop-pop's impending demise was to not. Yeah, like literally I had no clue how close to death he actually was until it happened. And I learned through voicemail of all things. Yeah, evidently I wasn't mature enough to handle it. But I was mature enough to know about the machete that Uncle Charles kept under his pillow just in case the Viet Cong decided to show up and finish the job. Charming childhood I had. And then I didn't even think about this until I started writing the script. But like 5 or so years later, I wound up losing one of my uncles, one of my favorite uncles, actually, in one of the most tragic ways imaginable. And then maybe like 2 or 3 years after that, I lost my grandmother. But honestly, it was those first 2 deaths that had the most long-lasting impact on me. It wasn't that I didn't love my grandma. I mean, obviously I did, but it was just the fact that, pre-existing condition plus very old person plus very poor diet usually means bye-bye. So I could at least make sense of that. But the first 2, nah. Everything I knew, everything I had been taught up until that point told me that there was no reason that God would allow my grandfather and my uncle to die the ways that they did if I was so sincere, and believe me, I was, with my prayers. I mean, that is unless God isn't real.
The gods of Olympus have abandoned me.
Going back to the conflict between Ramonda and Shuri, the latter is obviously visibly irked by her mother holding on to what she considers to be baseless beliefs. Ramonda, on the other hand, is trying as best she can to help her daughter process her grief before it consumes her. From what we can see, aside from her initial breakdown at T'Challa's internment, Shuri doesn't really give herself time to process her brother's death. She even goes so far as to say that she actively avoids thinking about him, because if she does, then she will be consumed by anger. But that being said, why is she so angry if, again, she never really believed that the ancestors would do anything to make the situation any better in the first place? And I mean, the movie makes it clear that T'Challa died of some natural unnamed illness. So again, why is Shuri so mad? And okay, we can argue that, emotions are inherently irrational, and I would abide that sentiment. But let me conjecturalize here for a minute. Could it be that Shuri is feeling betrayed, deceived, lied to even? If not by the ancestors, then at the very least by the culture that taught her that the ancestors could do anything to help her in the first place. Because you see, that's how I felt. Betrayed, deceived, lied to by the people who taught me that God answers prayer. And even more so, the people who taught them that. Because you see, later for all of this God works in mysterious ways garbage, you can save that for a Medea movie. I needed God at that time. And God didn't show up. And that made me very, very angry. But not necessarily with God, because again, at this point I had just concluded that he never existed to begin with. But again, with the people who taught me to believe that there ever was a God to begin with. Also by the culture who taught me to put my trust in a figment of my imagination. But more than anything else, angry with myself for ever allowing myself to believe in such fairy tales in the first place. Well, I mean, that's how I felt for a very long time, at least. Any of you who watched my Liberation Theology video know that since then things have changed. But I say that to say that if this is how Shuri feels, then I can very much empathize with it. But that being said, I had to learn, like Shuri does in the movie's climax, that my rage ultimately wasn't doing me any favors, and if anything, it was holding me back. What she also learns is that any action she makes in anger is ultimately shallow, because it's never going to be satiated. The rage that she feels is only going to fester. And eventually that festering is going to manifest itself into consumption of her entire being. And I think this is as good a time as any to segue into our movie's antagonist. First off, let me get this out the way. The Black Panther franchise far and away has the best cast of antagonists since the Nolan trilogy. And y'all know how much I love me some Bane. See, I wasn't really sure how they were going to integrate the whole Mesoamerican motifs into the film aside from aesthetics, but let me tell you something. After watching it, I freaking love it. Like, almost to an inappropriate degree, I love it. Like Matt Walsh with minors. But yeah, I feel like considering this being a Disney product, after all, the movie did just enough with its socio-political potential to be relevant to the plot without feeling ham-fisted in or farcical, a bad habit that Disney has developed over the past decade or so. Anyway, I'm beginning to lose the plot here. Coincidentally enough, just like the movie does in its second half, but we'll save that for later. Namor, and for that matter, Killmonger, and if y'all watched my last video, even Nolan's Batman, are all examples of what happens when you get stuck in the anger phase of the grieving process. It consumes you, and you just use any reason to justify whatever actions come from that anger. I will die on this hill, and I'm pretty sure a ton of other people will as well. But to date, in my opinion at least, Killmonger is still the best antagonist that the MCU has ever created. Well, aside from the Phase 4 VFX department, but that's another issue for another day. And the reason why is because he is so sympathetic, and that's what makes both he and Namor so compelling, despite how shallow and self-interested their motives really are once you dig beneath the surface. Remember, everything that Eric has done all the way up until his dying breath is just retribution for his daddy's death. And further is a response to the grief that his community has caused him. And even further than that, how they abandoned him in his time of need. Like, I really cannot articulate any further how important the concept of communal grief is to the Black experience. So I'll just plug Victory's video instead. That's half the battle right there. Like, I mean, yeah, it would be kind of hard to explain to your nephew why his dad has a giant claw mark in his chest while you're standing there dressed up like a 6.5 foot tall black cat. But did you ever think about how different things would have gone if T'Chaka had at least brought his nephew into his rightful village instead of just pretending like the boy didn't exist in the first place? I swear I'm just going to get this guy on a t-shirt at this point. In a similar way, Namor really never got a chance to mourn the loss of his mother or his people. I mean, yeah, his mutation gives him powers on par with the MCU's Thor, according to Coogler at least, but it also leaves him a motherless child. Thus, the title Un Niño Sin Amor. So, a child without love. Namor, like Killmonger, is enraged at the toll that colonization is taking on both he and his people. Or at least that's what he tells himself. Like, as justifiable as his crusade is, are we sure that this is really as much of a preemptive, logically thought out stratagem as he says it is? Or is it just an excuse for him to avenge all that he's lost in his time under the sea? Like, at least Eric's plan was to liberate at least all oppressed black peoples the world over, and basically flip the socio-political hierarchy. Namor, at least as far as I remember, because I've only seen the movie one time at this point, is just planning on indiscriminately drowning the entirety of the surface world, which, I mean, he's got to know that the vast majority of the people on the surface are victims of colonization themselves. Like, I'm pretty sure in the centuries that he's been alive, he's seen more than a few black bodies floating around in the Atlantic. Even with that being said, pretty much everything that Namor does in this movie is justified, if we're going to be real. Like, even his war against the Wakandans only happens because they pulled up first. And yeah, the surface world's been polluting the ocean for centuries, but still, are we sure that he's not just using that as an excuse to exact his own vengeance? And I mean, y'all can feel how y'all want to feel about vengeance or whatever, that's y'all's business. But my point is that, at least based on these movies, Namor and Killmonger are driven less by righteous indignation than they are by grief. And we know this based on how little they seem to care about all of the collateral damage that they rack up in pursuit of their respective goals. And I mean, we could, and I will argue that Shuri does the same thing until the most narratively opportune moment in the film, when she realizes that vengeance ultimately will never fill the hole that has been left by all of the loss she's experienced. And frankly, nothing ever will. See, often when we talk about grief, matter of fact, most times when we do, we're talking almost exclusively about death. But the thing is, all you need to grieve is to lose something of value to you, whether that's a job, a relationship, a friendship, or whatever. And oftentimes we wind up trying to fill the void left by that loss with something we consider to be comparable. I mean, the post-heartbreak hoeing phase is practically, or actually is, a media trope at this point. But most who have gone through that phase eventually get to a point of understanding that no amount of casual hookups in the world is going to fill the void left by having an intimate emotional connection with somebody. I mean, that is, unless you're Drake, seems to be doing wonders for him. Okay, I retract that last part. My point is, we often use placeholders to avoid confronting our grief. Because let's keep it a buck, grief is painful and nobody likes pain except Kanye stans, apparently. But in avoiding our grief, we never really give ourselves a chance to heal from it. Now, I'm not asserting that you can ever completely heal from the loss of a loved one, especially an immediate one. But what I am saying is that avoiding processing that grief ultimately, in the long run, serves to do more harm than good. Not just to you, but the people around you. But while we are talking about grief, let's take a moment to talk about the star of this film, the shepherd mother of the Church of Chocolate Cougars herself, Lady Angela Bassett. Told y'all I got a thing for older women. See, here's the thing about life. It goes on. Even when we struggle to. Bills still need to be paid, errands still need to be run. You know how that goes. See, when the community mourns, there needs to be at least one person who's willing to hold the fort down. And in my life, at least, and I'm sure in the lives of many black folks, that person is almost always a woman. Angie is basically this movie's big mama. She's the one that the entire country is looking to for strength, not just politically, but symbolically. And this is why she insists that Wakanda needs a Black Panther. They need a source to draw their strength from, herself included. Now, you ever asked yourself the question, what happens when your strong friend finally runs out of strength? Well, this is what happens.
I am queen! Have I not given everything?
See, what makes this scene so heartbreaking and powerful is that you can sympathize with both parties here, but you understand Ramonda's rage. She's been asked to make the ultimate sacrifice with her husband, with her son, and now with her daughter. Life and the community, for that matter, just keeps taking and taking and taking away from her and giving little, if anything, back. And yet she is still expected to just keep the train moving on. She's expected to be the rock that's holding everything and everyone down. She's been asked to make the ultimate sacrifice time and time again. And when she finally has nothing else to give, she cracks under the weight of her own grief. This, folks, is often the plight of the black matriarch, for reasons that I've already talked about ad nauseum in earlier videos, who is thrust into a headship role even when unwanted. Everyone is looking to her for guidance even when she doesn't really know where to go. But she's got to figure it out, if for no other reason than because, again, life goes on. And I really wish that I had more to say about Nakia other than hot damn, where'd you get those yams? And Riri, for that matter, who both kind of suffer from a lack of character development, especially in the movie's second half. I mean, maybe all the time that they wasted using Bilbo Baggins over here as a way to assuage any white guilt that non-melanated moviegoers might be experiencing watching the colonizers' lust for power drive a wedge between what should be natural allies on exploring Nakia's grief instead of just giving her a throwaway line that ultimately gets nullified by the mid-credits scene at the end of the movie.
Ever thought what we would be doing if the U.S. was the only country in the world with vibranium?
God, I hate this line. Like, nigga, you're a Fed. You are them. At the time of filming this video here, my wife is currently hospitalized. And actually, like a month ago, she was on life support for like 2.5 weeks or something like that. So that's what took me so long to get the Batman video out, for those of you who actually care why. All 5 of y'all. But I say that to say, at the time when all of this was going down, I just could not bear processing the idea of worst case scenario, or at least that's what I told myself. Now, don't stress yourselves out. She's on the mend now and really should be home any day now. But again, going back to that period, I just could not bear the thought of having to live life without the one person in the world that I love more than life itself. So I could only imagine Nakia not only doing that for 5 years, but also having to raise a child in the process. Like, honestly, I don't know if I would have the strength to do that. And I don't want to find out. And that's why when she comes home, I plan on keeping her in a bubble in the bedroom. She's only allowed out for sexy time and to eat. Don't worry, there's a commode in the bubble. Like, narratively, I understand why they decided to focus the second half on Shuri, but honestly, I would have preferred them to give that time to Nakia, considering all that I just said. So why in the blue suede shoe, Disney, did y'all decide to give 10 minutes worth of screen time to colonizer apologetics incarnate over here when you could have given it to Miss New Booty instead? I don't even know why I set myself up like that. Now, while I am talking about side characters, I will take a little bit of time to address the M'Baku controversy, which honestly shouldn't be one to begin with, but whatever. I know somebody's going to comment on it, so here's my take on things. Considering that the movie's overarching theme revolves around processing grief, like, really, what more did y'all want him to do? Like, he served his purpose to the plot. The only other side character aside from Nakia who has a intimate enough relationship with T'Challa to warrant more development is Okoye. Like, did y'all forget that until like the last 30 minutes of the first movie, the Jabari were ops? Whatever relationship M'Baku and T'Challa had after that movie was cordial at best. So what you're telling me is that you really want to shoehorn an off-screen relationship into this movie just to get a ding-a-ling front and center for a few minutes? Kevin Samuels is dead, folks. Now, is Wakanda Forever a perfect movie? No, not by any stretch. For reasons that I've already stated and reasons that I may or may not get to later on in this analysis. And if I'm be real with y'all, I still prefer the first one to this one. And I'm also going to say this, I did have to kind of turn off my poli-sci mind for a second, especially when the movie tried to portray Namor as a villain for literally doing the same thing that the feds have been trying to do to Julian Assange for like a decade now, or Agent Ross's entire presence in this film. But then again, this is Disney after all. And there isn't a minor's chance in Matt Walsh's house that the biggest media conglomerate in history is not going to go out of its way to prevent any White Watchers from having a temper tantrum. Unless they're these niggas, apparently. Honestly, there's no pleasing them. Unless you're a minor. And this, folks, brings us to the beginning of the end of this analysis. I want to go back to a line that M'Baku says about Namor's people and what they call him, and why it's significant not just for its content, but the point in the movie when it comes, and how it parallels the significance of the Black Panther to Wakandan culture. You see, boys and girls, back before hip-hop died, when the battle rap scene's best ambassador since Slim Shady got bodied by a singing nigga, Black Panther was known primarily for his exploits with the Avengers, which just so happened to, more often than not, take place somewhere like North America, outer space, the multiverse, the paint dimension, you know, pretty much everywhere except Wakanda, the place that T'Challa is supposed to be the king of. Sometime during the 2010s, Marvel drafted Ta-Nehisi Coates, yes, Mr. The Case for Reparations himself, to take the helm of the Black Panther character. And instead of just brushing aside the conundrum that I just presented to you, like Matt Walsh does his home state's Age of Consent, Coates went 10 toes down into it, like Matt Walsh at a lolicon. I promise that's the last Matt Walsh joke. No, I don't. So what does happen to the richest, most technologically advanced nation in the world when its king is off gallivanting with the colonizers? Well, evidently a bunch of really, really bad stuff, including the death of Shuri. Now, I'm not going to spend time spoiling a decades-long comic arc, but the Cliff Notes version is that T'Challa realizes that his significance as the Black Panther goes beyond his capacity to protect Wakanda from physical threats, but it's also his ability to be a spiritual totem for the Wakandan people. I said in one of my past videos, one of my better ones actually, that according to hegemonic masculinity, a man is expected to fulfill two roles, that of protector and provider. But one role that I didn't mention, and this is especially true among religious folks, is that of the priest. Now, this isn't me saying that if your dad doesn't have a sermon prepared before Sunday brunch, then he's a deadbeat, but it is me saying that, again, according to traditional standards of manhood, that the patriarch of the house is expected to be the source from which the rest of the family draws strength and seeks guidance. So, again, a totem. This is what Namor is in this movie. The consummate, hegemonically masculine leader. He's not just a king or a commander, but he's the source of strength from which his people draw theirs. And this is why they're willing to fight to the death, not just for Talokan, but for he himself. And this is why I think Shuri taking on the mantle of the Black Panther is so powerful, and why it subverts the very expectation held by the release the M'Baku cut cult in the first place. Because for me, at least, my family, and I dare say that of many Black families, has always been matriarchal. My mom, her mom, my dad's mom, they've always been the one filling the role of the quote-unquote male leader, even if they lack the prerequisite genitalia to do so. And that's because there never really was a man willing or capable of filling the role that they did. That's the role that Ramonda plays in this movie. And again, it's a big source of conflict between she and Shuri. Yeah, she's able to hold down the fort, but she believes herself incapable of being the totem that her people need because this isn't what they're used to, even though that's literally what she's been doing for all of her screen time. So it's interesting then when Shuri does enter the ancestral plane, which I guess in this movie is played as a manifestation of the subconscious, even though in the first movie T'Challa was able to commune with all Black Panthers past, but whatever. She winds up seeing the last person she expected to see, let alone seek guidance from. It isn't until she realizes in the movie's climax that any action she commits out of rage will ultimately ring hollow and more than likely cause more harm than good. And it's at this point that she's finally able to draw strength from the one person from who she needs to draw it from the most. Shuri becoming the Black Panther is significant because, yeah, it's a woman taking on a role that's traditionally reserved for men, but also because it signifies to Wakandans that so long as there's a village, there will always be a totem. In other words, a source from which to draw strength, even if unexpected. When my grandmother died, nobody really stepped in to fill the role that she played because honestly, those were boots, or better yet, house shoes that were way too big to fill. But that didn't mean that the village would implode. Instead, what we would have gleaned from our matriarch, we wound up gleaning from each other. And the lessons, the values, and the memories that we took from her, we used to strengthen us and to help us use that past in order to move forward. That's what it means to draw strength from the ancestors. And that's the lesson that Shuri learns, that even if not physically, she can keep the spirits of her mother and her brother alive in the lessons and the guidance that they left with her. So back to what I said earlier about this movie just being one big homegoing service. You ever notice how Black folks, the older Black folks in particular, never really refer to death as dying? We tend to call it something like passing on or transitioning or going home to be with the Lord. The Black Lord, by the way. That's because, like I've said several times in other videos, Black folks, both here and abroad, generally speaking, of course, tend to be more spiritual than the Gen Pop. And thus, death doesn't have the same kind of finality for us, again, generally speaking, as it does for a lot of other people. I'm not going to lie, when the news of Chadwick Boseman's death broke, I was firmly in the camp of, yeah, we probably shouldn't do a Black Panther 2. And I've said in the past that Black Panther is not my favorite solo Marvel movie, and I really don't know why I said that. Or actually, I do know why I said that, and it's the same reason why Kyrie decided to share a link to a Black Hebrew Israelite documentary that he probably never even watched for himself. And that's to make myself feel a lot smarter than I have any reasonable right to, without me really doing anything to warrant me feeling that way. Yeah, I know it's old news, but it's still funny to me. But yeah, Black Panther wasn't just a movie. It was a phenomenon, really. Like, I hadn't seen the diaspora come together like this since Obama's first POTUS campaign. But with the added bonus of actually living up to the hype this time. See, what makes Black Panther unique from pretty much any other A, or if we're really just going to be real about it, B+ comic book character, and again, what makes him my second favorite character of all time, is that he is to Blackness what Steve Rogers is to the American spirit. He is the idealized version of Black masculinity personified. And Wakanda is basically the black version of all those alternate history, what if the South won the war books that make up the bulk of Southern core curriculum. And that, I think, is what makes both the character and the actor that portrayed him mean so much to the diaspora. Again, Wakanda Forever isn't a perfect movie by any stretch, but given the circumstances, I think that Coogler and Co. did a phenomenal job portraying what black grief looks like after the repast is over with. Because white folks, and I don't mean any shade by this, honestly, in the words of Mr. Morale himself, we grieve different. Like, the reason why Community is such an integral part to the black experience from cradle to the grave, the diaspora over, is because historically, at least on this side of the Prime Meridian, that's all we really had. Again, Community is what got us through the Middle Passage, is what got us through slavery, through Reconstruction, through Jim Crow, through the Civil Rights era, through the war on drugs, and now through a post-George Floyd world. This is why black Twitter is literally a place that people are actively trying to find like it's El Dorado or something, and white Twitter is literally a meme. This is why I go out of my way to try and to platform black creators that somehow manage to be smaller than me, because I want to try and to give them a helping hand in a world that I know is going to go out of its way to kick them in the dick. This is why whenever I see another black man walk in my direction on the street, I try to make eye contact and at least give him a head nod or something. So yeah, this movie, like T'Challa's service, is as much a celebration of life as it is a time of mourning. Because whether you choose to believe in the existence of spirits or the afterlife or whatever, our ancestors do in fact live on, if in no other way than in the memories of the ones who loved them. So yeah, Wakanda Forever is basically Coco, which coincidentally enough is one of the only two films that have ever gotten me glassy-eyed. And they're both made by Pixar by happenstance. The other one is Toy Story 3. Y'all know what scene I'm talking about. I mean, if this movie doesn't teach us anything else, it's that the death of a king does not have to mean the demise of his kingdom. I mean, the black folks are experts in anything aside from sexually suggestive dance moves, of course. It's enduring trauma and overcoming adversity. I mean, do y'all really want me to sit here and start reeling off the names of black icons that we lost in the prime, if not before that time of their lives? And every single time we found a way to use their legacies to fuel our press forward. I mean, Chairman Fred said it himself. You can kill the revolutionary, but you can't kill the revolution. And so what this says, if nothing else, is even without a Black Panther, black people, we're going to be all right. Even if he won't be.